Hey everybody, my name is SPAZ and I'm a CD junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to discuss a Liverpool band by the name of China Crisis. Liverpool, China, doesn't make sense to me either, but doesn't matter because China Crisis is a great band. For anybody sitting there thinking, oh, Synthpop, SPAZ, you're talking about Synthpop. No, you need to listen. They may have started out as a synth-pop band, but they became something so much more. So I got into China Crisis in 1983 because of the track Working with Fire and Steel. I heard it on K-Rock, which was a very popular station in Southern California in the 80s. But I was a year late to the party because that was off of their second album. So, of course, I had to go back one album and fell in love with the band, and I followed them ever since. So let's go through their catalog as quickly as I can, and hopefully this will inspire you to listen to China Crisis, purchase China Crisis, and buy China Crisis, and pay for China Crisis, because that's what we should be doing with our music. We should be buying it. We're going to start with their debut album. Came out in 1982. It's called Difficult Shapes and Passive Rhythms. This is a very unique album on its own because it's not just pop, it's also very experimental. They're going off on different musical avenues, trying to really find their voice, I guess, in a way. But I guess the best comparison would be maybe the first two OMD albums, which were very synth pop meets experimental. This isn't as Kraftwerkian as OMD were, but it's definitely a synth pop duo at the time, Gary Daly and Eddie London. Gary Daly had a very unique voice, very different and easily identifiable. Eddie London had this sweet, wonderful pop voice, and both of them together singing songs or harmonizing with each other really, really worked for this band. Difficult Shapes and Passive Rhythms features some great tracks like Christian, which is just very almost soft and gentle and catchy. And then there's No More Blue Horizons, which is very Steely Dan-ish. More on that later, so hang on. But a lot of great tracks. There's even, this here is the deluxe edition, so it has a lot of B-sides, and it even has their debut single, Scream Down at Me, which was very weird, odd, and wonderful. African and White follows in that tradition. Still very catchy, but not commercial top 40 for U.S. radio, so that's probably why this didn't get played a lot over here. But China Crisis, debut album from 1982, Difficult Shapes and Passive Rhythms. Then came the album that I learned about China Crisis on, Working with Fire and Steel. This came out in 1983, and first time I heard Working with Fire and Steel with this catchy little synth bass line and this great chorus with that blended electronics with acoustic guitar and great hooks. There's a lot of other great songs on here like Tragedy and Mystery. In the UK, there's a track called Wishful Thinking that was a big hit, and that was sung by Eddie London. This version here is a deluxe edition that features plenty of bonus tracks, but I highly recommend this if you are a lover of synth pop. This is still very electronic, less experimental, and better melodies, just more straight ahead, better melodies. Their third album is when they really grew leaps and bounds. They went from being a synth pop band to being a pop band, but not just a simple pop band. We're talking with Flaunt the Imperfection, they became this sophisticated pop band with jazz leanings, and they sounded a lot like a more commercial Steely Dan. And there's a reason why they sounded like a commercial Steely Dan. It's because Steely Dan member Walter Becker produced the album. He was such an important part of this release that the boys in the band made him a bona fide member of China Crisis. If you read the credits in here, he is listed as an official band member. But this album is chock filled with great, wonderful melodies. Black Man Ray, You Did Cut Me, The Highest High, Blue Sea, a lot of great songs on here. King in a Catholic Style, Wake Up, And this is the deluxe edition, and it has a lot of extra bonus tracks. I'll always recommend deluxe editions. But you know what? If you can't get a deluxe edition, I still say track it down. If you want to buy vinyl, go ahead. But if you can get all those bonus tracks, I'm always going to recommend that. This was almost like going from Beatles for Sale to Sgt. Pepper. It was such a big leap in maturity and sound and songwriting, and it's absolutely a wonderful album. One of the best of the 80s by far. Next up, they switched producers, and they hooked up with Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley, who were best known for producing Madness and Dixie's Midnight Runners' Two-Rye album. The album is called What Price Paradise, and this is another stellar collection of songs. What Price Paradise takes the sound of Flaunt the Imperfection and just boosts it up and makes it a lot more commercial for American audiences. I don't know if that was their intention, but this is an album that probably most pop fans would really have dug way back in 1986 when it first came out. This has Arizona Sky, which was a radio hit over here, but it also has great songs like Best Kept Secret and We Do the Same, which is one of my favorite China Crisis songs. But What Price Paradise, another fine release from China Crisis. Took them 3 years to put out their next album, and they went back to Walter Becker, and they came out with Diary of a Hollow Horse. Diary of a Hollow Horse continues the same musical trajectory of the previous two albums, but instead of the music being more mature, the lyrics and the songwriting are more mature. The songs take a little more time to sink in. They're more thoughtful. In many ways, it doesn't seem as joyful as the last two albums, but it is still chock full of great songs. And this version here is the 2 CD version, which contains the original Walter Becker produced album, because they had gone back and they had re-recorded a few tracks at the insistence of the label and replaced the Walter Becker versions, and they released those as singles. This restores the Walter Becker versions and then puts those re-recordings on the other disc along with other tracks. And Diary of a Hollow Horse is still a fantastic album. It didn't make them superstars, and they should have been by this time. And so the band sort of disappeared for a while. It took another 5 whole years before the band reemerged as a duo again of Gary and Eddie with Warped by Success. This is an independent album. It's not as lushly produced as the previous albums, but it still has a lot of great songs on it. This might be a little hard to get, although it is part of a 2 CD set that had come out that also features their acoustic live album. But Every Day the Same sounds like classic China Crisis, that could have fit on the last couple albums. And again, there's still a little bit of experimentation on this, but it's still a fantastic album. I don't think they've put out an album that isn't fantastic. Believe it or not, it took 21 years before the band released what I consider their finest album, and that is Autumn in the Neighborhood. Came out in 2015. This came out 21 years after Warped by Success. And if anything, this definitely goes right back to the whole feel and vibe of Flaunt the Imperfection, and actually goes one step better. A lot of the instrumentation is acoustic. There no way in hell could they ever be considered a synthpop band, and it is filled to the brim. There's not a bad song on this album. The sad thing is they only made it available at their shows, and it would be very difficult to get. I think you can probably stream it or download it, but Autumn in the Neighborhood is the best China Crisis album, or at least, if people are going to get mad at that, let's just say it's equal to Flaunt the Imperfection. But China Crisis never put out a bad album because they're great songwriters. They're unique voices, unique musical visions, and they should really be checked out. Yes, they're from Liverpool. Yes, they're called China Crisis, but they don't have any Asian music themes to them, nor do they sound like the Beatles. They sound like China Crisis. They are definitely a band you should check out if you haven't heard them already. Please, I always beg people to purchase your music, whether it's physical or digital, because the bands don't make money if you're just streaming it. Unless, of course, this video is watched by 50 million people who are inspired to go out and stream China Crisis. They might earn $35. Anyway, China Crisis, that is it. I beg you all, if you are into 80s music, if you are into sophisticated pop, if you enjoy Steely Dan, China Crisis is a band for you, so definitely check them out. They also have an acoustic album called Acoustically Yours, and there's various best ofs. This is called The Very Best Of. Anyway, that's it. Thank you all for hanging out with me for a little while, and that is my little chat about China Crisis. And until next time, my name is SPAZ, and I'm a CD junkie.